just so the day doesn't get away from us, we do want to now work in a panel discussion with two senators who we were going to speak to after the Treasurer. Now we have Bill Shorten coming up at 1:30. So at this point, we'll stop for our discussion with Kimberley Kitching, Labor Senator, and Amanda Stoker for the Liberal Party from Queensland, relatively new to the Senate. Welcome to our studio for, I think, the first time, Amanda, and Kimberley. Not sure if you've been up with us before, but what a day. Kimberley Kitching, first of all, these resignations. Labor said, with its hand on heart for so long, that the House was in order. Why?
Well, because the vetting processes that the Labor Party has and its branches were in place, and they responded to the decisions that the High Court had made previously. So obviously in my home state of Victoria, the Sykes and Cleary case had a big impact there in the seat of Wills, and that branch of the ALP was very aware, because it had gone through the pain of that by-election, it was very aware of the requirements as they then stood. I think just today's decision, I think is a precedent and puts a further interpretation on the previous case law.
You actually think they've changed the ground rules?
Yeah,
I've heard
I do.
other people say this is a complete continuation of the sort of approach they've been taking.
I think it's an interpretation of what were reasonable steps that were defined in Sykes and Cleary, and that was the requirement in Sykes and Cleary. And of course, we also had the Canavan case last year, and the High Court in today's decision does refer to those that case law, but it is a precedent that it is now established around what you need to do. No one, and let's face it, the government, both the Liberal and National parties, had no vetting processes in place. They have not, and in fact, I think this was explored with some angst by coalition members, both privately and publicly, that they had no vetting processes in place in any of their branches. But
you all end up in roughly the same situation now, don't you? One way or another, through a series of decisions, we've got a series of by-elections.
I think that all parties will now take a very good look at this. And I mean, I think what will happen is that if you are going to run, you will have to have renounced any other citizenship prior to nomination.
Yeah, all right. Now, Amanda Stoker, you'll be familiar with Queensland, if nothing else, when it comes to these processes. And as we look down the list of margins and seats here, Longman is a wafer-thin hold for Labor at less than 1%. What do your own instincts tell you about what the party might do? Particularly in light of the budget, you're running around with the promised tax cuts. Why not put them to the test and go and sell them in these by-elections?
Well, it looks as though we'll be doing that no matter what. In circumstances where we have a by-election called, we will be active on the ground explaining how it is that the government is working to produce the best possible economic conditions for the people of Longman.
Do you see potential seat gains for the government coming out of this process? If not in Longman, then you've got the Tasmanian seat as well. I think it gets a little bit harder in some of the Western numbers. They're a bit heavier for Labor, but how confident, if you've got your confidence in this budget, is there upside for the government here?
Look, it's a good opportunity for us to be showing in a local sense the impact of all of the big picture work that's been done over the last 5 years by this government, and that's now starting to bear fruit in the form of what's been in this budget. So I'll really look forward to being on the ground in Longman and sharing that really positive story.
Yep, so Kimberley Kitching, if tax cuts are popular, we're told that almost universally they are, then the government starts this run, at least at a couple of seats, on firm footing, doesn't it?
I think people will be pretty sceptical about tax cuts coming in 7 years' time. I mean, that's 3 federal elections away. And I can tell you, I worked in a Victorian Treasurer's office. If I had suggested in that office to either, my fellow members or to the Treasurer or to the bureaucrats in the Department of Treasury and Finance there that, we should have some tax cuts 7 years down the track, I probably would have lost my job. So I just feel that these tax cuts, they are too far in the distance. They don't mean anything to people because they are so far away. I think it's it's a bit of a fake budget, I think. And also, how do we know that there won't be a change of heart and these tax cuts will actually happen?
Yeah, well, what's the counter argument to that, Amanda? I mean, it is a long way out. It's 7 years out. It's 2 or 3 elections out. How do you actually make this feel like a real offering? Not the short-term one, the 12 months, that looks like being locked in with Labor support, but the bigger pitch, the one for 7 years.
Well, this budget has put forward a suite of measures that show this government is planning in a systemic and methodical way for there to be growth across the economy now, next year and several years into the future. A part of that is income tax cuts for individuals. Another part of it is the enterprise tax plan. Another part of it is big infrastructure investment, and Queensland's going to have some amazing projects. Upgrades to the Bruce Highway, to the M1 and the Brisbane Metro are all going to be feeding that growth. It's a positive plan that will have an impact into the future. When we compare it to what's on offer from Labor, we're looking at $200 billion worth of new taxes. I mean, it's all very well to say our cuts aren't real. I think they do send an important signal, but more importantly, it's a whole lot better than what the opposition's got to offer.
They're new taxes, but they are also what some people call a war chest. They are budgetary room for Labor to move in, to perhaps even go further than you and faster.
Look, I'd say it's feeding a narrative that's about class war and the politics of envy, when really what we need to be focused on is the economics of bringing opportunity to ordinary Australians with all of their aspirations.
So,
I don't agree that it's class war. What I think it is, we all have grandparents, and some people who are listening to this program, some people in your studio will have grandparents who now won't have an energy supplement. There will be people who are looking for a job who have had no increase in that. There will be people who now have to work till they're 70. These are unfair measures. It's an inequitable spread of taxation system. It's an inequitable spread of a budget.
You don't actually believe, do you, because you've had enough time to look in the Senate, the way they do business there, that what's been published last night is going to be what passes the red room, as they call it?
I quite enjoy the estimates process. So we will dig through the budget papers, and we will be having a very good long look at some of these measures.
Did Bill Shorten, in your view, and you're pretty close to him, we're keeping an eye, what time is it now? It's 1:30 and he's due to speak soon, he's not there yet. Do you think he approached the task of his own budget speech in reply tomorrow night with any assumption that he had 4, or let's call it 5 by-elections rattling down the track at him?
I think anyone who is following the High Court process was very aware of, the fact that the court may well have made a decision. I mean, obviously no one knows until the decision is handed down. But of course, people do look at
scenarios.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. And what about from the government's point of view? As I say, there's nothing really in this for the government, Amanda, but it can get in and run and try to claw seats back. Do you think the budget, as it was prepared last night, had any assumptions in it about the need to put this to the people within, what are we saying, 5 or 6 weeks perhaps?
Look, you probably have to ask the Treasurer what was in his mind as he put it together, but there should have been no great surprise that we're facing a by-election here, given that what the High Court has said is that Ms Gallagher's arguments found no support in the decision of Re Canavan.
Yep.
There's been no change of emphasis from the High Court. It's precisely the application of what we heard last year.
And what about the general election then? Everyone's put a label on this budget as pre-election. There seems to be a widely held view that there won't be another one before the general election. Do you think it does the job for your government as a platform to go to the bigger poll?
Look, what's great about this budget is that it is the culmination of 5 years' worth of work to build a stronger Australian economy. And in a campaign sense, seeing that crystallise is something that's really exciting. And I hope that it will be something that we are able to share in a really positive way with the electorate if we find ourselves at an election. But they don't get backbenchers to make those decisions.
No. Sooner or later you will, though. And
but 5 years where, in fact, debt has doubled. It's now at $500 billion, and people can go and look on the debt calculator, and you will see the numbers tick, 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 ticking over. And this government is actually setting up for children who don't have a vote yet to be paying a lot back down the track. So I'm not sure there is any planning. I think this is quite a cynical budget, and it was designed for an election.
So do you suggest it's just luck? Because the room that the Treasurer had to manoeuvre around tax cuts appears to have been created by a showering of cash coming back into the coffers. It's running pretty strongly. I think there was a $13 billion improvement in tax receipts from MyEFO only 6 months ago to last night. I mean, something's going on that's making this economy cough up large amounts of revenue.
Well, you know,
that's good, isn't it?
You don't have to take my word for it. You can take Peter Costello's word for it, where he said that, in fact, the debt should be paid down. And future generations were going to be burdened by this government's budgets, and they would be paying back that money with interest. All
right. Look, we're going to wrap up our panel conversation here. We'll go straight to Bill Shorten right now.